Hello, it's 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I hope that doesn't come as a major surprise to you. Quite a lot to get through today. I'm having one of those mornings where the diet of news is not exactly nourishing, is it? That double header there, that pincer movement there, where food prices are going up at a rate of knots while wages in real terms are coming down. And if you wonder, as I sometimes do, what those phrases mean in real terms, what does it mean? It simply means that even if you're getting a pay rise, inflation is bigger than your pay rise. So in terms of what you can do with the money that is coming into your account every month, the answer is less than you could last month. And that's nightmare scenario territory. Don't worry, Boris Johnson's absolutely on the case on a beach in Greece. But the idea of less income, more outgoings, through the ages, that's a recipe for difficulty and disaster. A new peak in grocery price inflation. It seems like only yesterday that Jacob Rees-Mogg was telling us that voting for Brexit would bring down food prices and bring down energy prices. You remember that, of course. The Conservative Party currently seeking to elect a new leader for more of the same. And the reason I say I'm having one of those mornings is that, I mean, what do? You don't want to turn on your radio every morning. You tune into me for sunshine and happiness. I know what it's like. It's like Morecambe and Wise. It's like Eric and Ernie doing the little dance at the end of the show. That's me and Keith, that is. That's why you come. That's why you're here every day. You're not tuning in for doom and gloom. But the news is pretty grim. So we're going to have to walk that tightrope once again. And I think a lot of it... Should I be doing this bit on air, or is this the bit I should be doing off air? Working out my own approach to my day at work. My day at the coalface. I think we established last week just how much graft is involved in doing this for a living. I quite like doing it on air. I like to feel like, we're all part of the same team. And that's the problem. So tone is the answer. Even when we're talking about heavy-going stories, even when we're talking about difficult stories, I need you to help me keep it upbeat. That is obviously you can't keep everything upbeat when you're talking about the attempted murder of Sir Salman Rushdie. Injecting too much levity or humour into proceedings would be a little bit inappropriate. But when you're talking about the cost of living crisis, keep it in your mind that people are really, really struggling, but also keep it in mind that this is human and conversational. And that is the end of my pep talk to myself at 6 minutes past 10 on Tuesday morning. So we'll do that second. We'll do the economy, the energy, the cost of living. We'll do that second. And my continuing quest to find ways of doing it that are engaging for both of us without being too distressing or depressing continues. That's what I get paid for. I should probably stop stressing you out with my own professional concerns. So we'll park that for now. And we'll move on to a story instead, early doors today, that is becoming something of a hardy perennial. There's a degree of mischief involved in some of the reporting, I think, but only a degree, because it is a real problem. It is a genuine issue. And it is a prediction that white working-class boys are likely to fall further behind in A-level results and in the stampede for university places this year. A so-called social mobility expert has said that boys should no longer be seen as the dominant gender because they trail behind girls in higher education, particularly if they come from poorer homes. Now, usually, and sadly, outfits like the Daily Mail usually frame this somewhat racially. When black boys were performing worst in schools, when I started this job, it was usually black boys who were getting the worst results, black boys from poorer backgrounds, and people would queue up on programs like this one to tell me why white people would queue up to tell me why it was all the fault of the parents and broken homes and absent fathers and all that sort of thing. I wonder whether the same white people want to ring in today and blame all this on parents. You're more than welcome to. Just talk me through it, because it's not a world I know a lot about. 0345 6060 973. And that invitation to compare to other ethnicities is very, very loaded. What you do, you get some sort of ethno-nationalist masquerading as an academic to write an article about why this is evidence of oppression or discrimination, when in fact it's nothing of the sort. But it is a problem, and problems admit solutions. Questions need answers. You might know a little bit more about this than I do, and therefore you might have an answer. White working class boys now suffer some of the lowest university participation rates compared with any other group. And it's particularly acute in secondary school, early in secondary school, when learning gets stymied. Listen, the gaps between white and black or Caribbean, they're not that big. Chinese kids are way ahead. They're like a lap ahead of everybody else. And other Asian ethnicities also perform better. That is going to simply have a lot to do with culture at home and the attitude to education and the attitude to learning. The immigration experience often promotes education in a way that homegrown people don't. But what I'm really interested in is the why of it. And the why of it is born of a desire to find ways of improving it. Listen, early in the week, as you know, when my energy levels are high, I have quite ambitious approaches to the program. And on a day like today, I dream of a parent listening to this program, learning something from you, and possibly, although less likely from me, and actually changing a life a little bit, changing a lad's life a little bit, giving a parent an idea that they can then put into practice. And it might just prevent an 11-year-old boy who's due to start secondary school in September from becoming part of this statistic. He could instead become part of a different one. But I don't know what the answer is. Why am I interested in this? I'll tell you why I'm interested in this. Sounded like a Spice Girl then. It's because I'm drawn to the underdog. Show me a story and I will start cheering for the person who is lagging behind. Show me a race, and I will start cheering for the person who is not winning. I don't know why. It's not a strength or a weakness. It's not a character defect or a mark of character. It's just the way I'm built. It's the way I've always been built. It's probably why I support Kidderminster Harriers, regardless of the fact that it's my hometown. I am drawn to the underdog. So when we talked about white working class or black working class boys doing worst at school, I was drawn to the underdog. I was drawn to the idea of this is an injustice, an unfairness, an inequality that must be addressed and can surely be fixed. You, of course, just for the record, you do get your armchair eugenicists coming along and claiming that it's actually down to some sort of innate ability to process information or some form of ethnic genetic inheritance. But that way Adolf Hitler lies. So we can close that avenue down quite early. And today the underdog is the white working class boy. And I want to cheer for him. And I want to know two things. I want to know what happens early secondary school that means boys more than girls and white boys more than Asian boys fall off the roundabout. They fall off the seesaw. Something happens early doors at secondary school. What is it? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060 973. I've also got a question on this one about you and how spells can be broken, about the question of why you manage. And I don't really enjoy, how can I put this when I spend so much time boasting? How can I phrase this without being hypocritical or pot kettle? I don't want to hear about how wonderful you are. I want to hear about how lucky you are. There's an astonishing little thread on Twitter yesterday from a lad whose family emigrated to America, I think from Afghanistan, possibly Pakistan, and he got taught English at the age of 7 by one woman. I remember her name because it's so memorable. Lung, Ms. Lung, taught him English, and he's now a published novelist, very successful writer. He's been looking for Miss Lung for years, and he couldn't find her because he never knew her first name. He only knew her second name. I told you it was memorable. And she changed his life at the age of 7 by teaching him English. That's not what I'm looking for today, but I'm looking for something similarly inspirational. What made you lucky? How come you managed to defy the stereotype? As a white working class boy, why didn't you fall off the educational merry-go-round as you began at secondary school? Because at primary school, the field is pretty even. At primary school, the pitch is pretty level. Something happens when you get to secondary school, and I want to know what it is. 0345 6060 973. But I also want to know why it's boys, not girls. Not just white boys, Asian boys, and you can't even say black boys, because as Akala has written at great length, the difference between kids from African backgrounds and kids from Caribbean backgrounds is going to be huge in these sort of, or at least significant and noticeable in these sort of scenarios. But simply speaking, let's just do white and non-white. Why would a white kid early doors at secondary school be more susceptible to decline than a white kid, even if it's only by a little bit? Remember, we're doing the underdog. And why would a white boy from a working class background, start slipping behind at secondary school in a way that his own sister would not? Because that, of course, brings home into the conversation. And at home, you're going to be perhaps not treated exactly the same as boys and girls. It's 10:13, coming up to 10:14. Do you want my theory or shall I save it for you? I feel quite strongly about this, actually. Of all the things that I have heard and read, what I would call relatively lazy right-wing provocateurs in the British media do in the years that I've been doing this job and slowly developing an ability or perhaps just an attempt to be an antidote to that sort of rabble-rousing, I have to say that the abuse directed at teachers, the lazy stereotyping directed at teachers never ceases to amaze me, particularly from middle-class journalists who, like me, can afford to send their own children to private school. You abuse teachers in the state system and then sit back and wonder why kids whose parents devour or inhale that sort of lazy, let's call it the Sun, or the sort of, the Rupert Murdoch school of tabloid rabble-rousing. He doesn't send his kids to the local comprehensive school, but he sells newspapers to people who do, and he sells them the idea that teachers are lazy, politically correct, virtue signalling, do-gooders who take off, months a year and never really do anything and moaning about. So I honestly believe, and I don't know how you disprove this theory, but I welcome you to tell me why I'm wrong, or indeed to tell me why I'm right with some evidence. I think you create an atmosphere that boys are particularly susceptible to, that schools and teachers are not on their side. And I think in the last 30 or 40 years, the British media has played an absolutely unforgivable role in doing that. Your Daily Mail columnists, your Sun journalists, creating the idea that teachers are the enemy. Think about when they want to take industrial action. This hit me like a freight train when my girls were at primary school and there were strike days. And you can feel that early sense of frustration and irritation because it's hitting you personally. God, what the hell are we going to do? I can't take the day off. How will the nation survive without my daily burblings? It's going to have to be you that takes the day. And then you're just a bit, why are they striking anyway? What are they striking about? And then if I come on the radio, if I was built in a slightly different way, I could turn you against them in the same way I could turn you against firefighters, or I could turn you against junior doctors, or I could turn you against nurses, or I could turn you against railway workers or train drivers or whoever I need to turn you against today in order to keep the owner of my newspaper suite at the top of the pile. But I fight it because of this very simple observation that another parent said to me. So we drop them off in the mornings and we trust them with our children's lives. So I think when they ask us for their support in industrial action or just their support in general, the least we can do is trust them when they tell us that they need it. And it's not always going to be true, and there'll be circumstances in which I will disagree with them or with the education profession or with the unions. But how mad is it that our gaslit country has created generations that see teachers as enemies? And a lot of the responsibility for that lies with relatively wealthy middle-class white journalists who send their own children to private school. And that's the end of my TED Talk. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060973. Why, early doors at secondary school, will a white boy fall behind a white girl and a white boy fall behind a non-white boy? What is it? What are the differences? What are the issues? And what, crucially, can be done about it? 19 minutes after 10 is the time. White working class boys likely to slip further in race for university. Do you know, there is indeed, like there always is, a Daily Mail article making precisely the point that I made. Who'll speak up for the working class white boys who've become Britain's new oppressed minority? What's a load of cobblers? Why don't the Daily Mail ever compare white working class boys to white middle class boys and ask why that is going on there? Always the word white, isn't it, that is most pertinent in their contemplations. Here, trying to make things better, not trying to make you angry. Marcus is in Merton. Marcus, what's going on?
Good morning, James. Nice to speak to you. I'm a white working class boy, brought up in a very mixed London background, so obviously Caribbean and white working class. I think the issue is intergenerational. So I definitely come from a poor estate background, but I went to university. Is that
what we mean now when we say working class? We just mean poor, don't we? Really, I think.
Yes, I think in its simplest terms, yes, I do. But I think I become class conscious, and I'll explain that the relevance of that soon when I studied sociology at university. But I think for many in the working class now, they're not very class conscious. I.e., they don't really understand or understand the background and the history around where they've come from. I.e., kind of know your place. There's only certain jobs that you would do,
right? And
the kind of intergenerational kind of expectations that then make you believe that you can only do certain jobs and do certain things. So I think there is an issue, particularly around white working class. Although it is a working class issue around aspiration.
Well, that's the word that I was about to use, aspiration. So they're arriving at secondary school and they're not seeing it as a springboard or a fast track. They're just seeing it as something that has to be endured for 5 or 7 years.
Yes. Because, only, my mum and my dad's generation, they just left and got a job. School was something they had to do, and they wanted to leave as soon as possible so they can get a job as soon as possible.
Right.
But it was never a career; it was always a job. So you need to do a trade, and there's certain expectations. So I think there is particular issue around aspiration. There's particular issues around white working class, particularly because the new generations, and I also come from some newer immigrant background, and they don't have that class-based system ingrained in them. That's intergenerational.
Well, if you've crossed continents to better yourself, if you've crossed continents to improve your life chances, and indeed, crucially, your child's life chances, then you're almost programmed to resist the idea of knowing your place, aren't you? Certainly for second generation. First generation might be driving buses, but you want your children to be accountants and lawyers.
That's right, but it's really important, James, to understand that, for example, Eastern Europe, they don't have a class-based system. America, it's all about money. If you've got money, the class systems in other cultures are not necessarily there. So I think in England, it's really important to understand why the working class, if you look at the history around skinheads, if you look at the history around the anger within the white working classes intergenerationally and how that moved forward, there is particular issues around the class-based system that's still entrenched within. And
that's why it's unhelpful for some media to sort of portray it as new. It's simply the case that other demographics have moved more, whereas this problem has always been there. It just they may not have been at the very bottom of the pile for a couple of generations, but they're there now. I like that. I very, very briefly, Marcus, why would girls perform better against that background, even if they were coming from the same household?
I think girls perform better. If I come from, the girls that I was brought up with, I think the girls perform better because their pathway is narrower within the working class system. So the trades, although they're open to them, there's a perception they're not necessarily open to them. So the girls,
we may as well get as many qualifications as we can and see what the world might hold for us. I get that. Well, I understand everything that you've said, but also the pathways you describe don't exist as much anymore. You're not going to follow your dad onto a production line, or follow your dad down the mine, or follow your dad onto into the factory in the way that perhaps, or the mill, if you want to go back far enough. So it admits a little more nuance. 24 minutes after 10. This is from, and I don't know whether he'll thank me for calling him this or whether he'll be flattered, but he's one of the sharpest. He's a pal of mine. You've heard me talk about him a lot. Runs a t-shirt shop in Uxbridge, and he is as sharp as a tack. He is someone who is, to my money, as bright as a button. If he'd gone to a school like mine, he'd be running a FTSE 100 company. That's not in any way denigrating what he does now or anything, but I know people that run FTSE 100 companies, and he's as clever as they are. I arrived at secondary school really up for learning, but within a year, due to a kind of reverse intellectual osmosis, I stopped. One kid was caught reading a book in the playground and was nicknamed Snobby Church Boy for the rest of his life. You shouldn't laugh at that, should you? That might be why. And that is part of it. And that would be more likely to happen to a boy than a girl. I don't think Snobby Church Girl would have been a thing, but Snobby Church Boy was. That's going to be part of it as well. How do you resist that? How do you make it cool to be clever or cool to be learning? Steph's in Birmingham. Steph, what would you like to say?
Hi, so I'm coming from a primary teaching background, so I always find this debate really interesting. I've got quite a lot to say on it. So
take your time.
I did my training in London in some really deprived, like inner city areas where the majority of children with black or from ethnic minority backgrounds, like really tough areas. But on the whole, and obviously I'm not speaking for an entire group, the parents and their families were so supportive of schools that if I needed to speak to them about behaviour or like the children struggling with something, they even, a lot of them had English as an additional language. They were so on board. They came to every parents' evening. They were just like a really supportive community. And I think as a result, the children attained well. And I've since moved to Birmingham and I've been working, I won't say the school, but I've been working in a suburb that's quite a deprived area, but it backs onto a huge estate and it's a white working class area. There's not a lot of diversity in the school intake. And what I've noticed compared to my experience in London was a real difference in like parental attitudes and engagement. And that's been quite surprising to me because I thought, I've worked in like inner city London. I can handle this. And I have handled it and I've built good relationships with them, but it makes it really hard when you're trying to get the children on board and the parents are quite negative towards school.
It's presence.
And teachers.
Presence is the word. So the parents aren't really present in this process that you describe.
Yeah.
And they need to be, don't they? How do we account for that? Is it, as Marcus suggested, is it partly because they don't see the point of education for their children? They don't see it as a gateway to something different or better.
Yeah, I think there's two sort of things at play. Like my parents were both from really poor working class backgrounds. They didn't go to university, but they qualified, and I've come from a middle class family now. But I think because of so many of the kind of industries have been completely obliterated and destroyed by the Conservative government over the years, there isn't that same like actual working class of people in the same way. And a lot of our parents don't work, like they've never had a job. They probably struggled a lot at school themselves when it wasn't as inclusive and supportive. They might have learning difficulties. So that kind of obliteration of that industry where people could be empowered and actually earn money for their families has had a knock-on effect.
But is that, really, if you were looking at a class full of children, that would be a big enough issue? Because I could see how it might, in a class of 30, that might be true of 5 parents or 6. But you think that's, forgive me for my naivety, but it's a bigger issue than that.
I think so. That was my experience of my particular school. Like, I can't speak for other places, but I think there's that two-pronged approach where that's had a knock-on effect on communities, but then ironically, a lot of those communities vote for a government that have kind of, taken away funding from local communities where children could engage in sports or, extracurricular activities. There's not that kind of youth centres open anymore.
There's a professor of education just up the road from you at the University of Wolverhampton called Damien Page, and he tweeted in response to the Mail's predictably crass coverage of this that the only time the right care about working class white boys is when they become ammunition in the right fabricated culture war. Try feeding them, heating their homes, funding their schools, increasing support services. Try that and then see what happens to university numbers.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating, and I think a lot of our parents consume that media, because I know they do because they've told me, and it does turn I think the media have a lot of responsibility for this. The attitude towards teaching in this country is so demoralising.
I don't even now,
really
even after all these years, I sometimes choke on my green tea when I hear somebody laying into teachers, or I read something designed to. Because what do you think if you've got the paper in front of you, or you've got the telly on or the radio on, and someone with all the trappings of success is giving it large about how lazy teachers are and how rubbish teachers are, and you're not perhaps that educationally blessed yourself, what are you going to pass on to your children? You pay attention to your teacher's son, or they're a bunch of they have more holidays than Judith Chalmers' son. You don't have to do what she says.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And and I think the key is like building relationships with parents, which I really try and do, and our school tries to do, and it's really important to me, and kind of making them feel like they have agency in this process of their child being educated. And I think if you can help them feel listened to, it's going to have a positive benefit.
Though. I admire what you do, and I register everything that you say. Very briefly, and I literally mean 10 seconds. Why are boys and girls so different in this area?
I think the socialisation and this kind of toxic like masculinity, it's not like cool to be clever. I think that's a huge role huge influence in it. Again, like with kind of, girls being socialised to be quite amenable and agreeable. I think a lot of the boys struggle with that sometimes, and that's the key as a teacher. You want to get them on board.
Yeah, that's snobby church boy stuff, isn't it? Thank you, Steph. Perfect. Your pupils are lucky to have you. And of course, the support that you should get, or the gratitude you should get from parents as a consequence of your pupils being lucky to have you, is the absence of that is part of the problem that we're dissecting. I'd like to speak to snobby church boy, or indeed to someone who really does recognise that notion of gender stereotypes robbing you of a different future because you fell into that trap. It breaks my heart to think of that at 11 years old, whatever background you're from, whatever ethnicity you belong to. 11 years old, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, but smart, sharp as a tack, turn up at secondary school, all good to go. Got teachers like Steph, although she's at a primary school, all there to help you. And then that whole business of peer pressure kicks in. 2 years down the line, it's gone. It's gone. Slipped out of your grasp, like the thing in Quidditch, the golden thing. Yeah, that probably needs a bit of work, that one. Dominic Ellis is here with the headlines. It's 10:34, and just to clarify a little further, it's so that you don't ask about class. It's why Marcus, the first caller, was so on the money. But why would right-wing newspapers be putting the word white in these stories when the real story is the gap between poor kids and middle-class kids? But you start asking those questions and the status quo starts crumbling. So you can write stories about why black kids are lagging behind, and all the white right-wing journalists will pile in and say it's because of parental irresponsibility. It's because they just don't understand like white people do. Blah, 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 blah. And believe me, I've been doing this job 20 years or so now, and that was commonplace when I started here. And then the roles are reversed, and it's not why a white what? So now it's white working class kids who are at the bottom of the pile. Crikey! So it must be for probably exactly the same reasons that black working class kids were. So it must just all down to parents. Oh, no. It's not down to parents. They're being discriminated against. They're being oppressed. That's the word used in the Daily Mail headline, oppressed. Whereas, of course, the real story is, why does our education system enhance and magnify the privilege that you're already born with? I'll use myself as an example. Why are my children, who've already got an advantage when they're born of wealth and education, parental education, why will the British education system make those gaps even bigger? That's what's really interesting. And part of the answer is because the parents of the poorest children, whatever ethnicity they may be, but if you're buying into right-wing media, you're more likely to be white working class, are being told all the time that teachers are good-for-nothing, lazy, work-shy, soap-dodging, muesli-munching, sandal-wearing hippies who don't deserve your respect and don't deserve your support. So when they try to enlist your help and your support to ensure that your son has a better life than you had, or a better crack of the whip than you had, you don't give them the support that they need. That's my simple answer to the problem. That's one of my answers to the problem. I'm keen to hear yours, and I now have two phone lines free if you're quick. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And that thing that, I don't know, maybe you don't even know. You don't recognise it quite as keenly as my correspondent did, but you arrive at secondary school at 11 and the world is your oyster. And by the time you're 13 or 14, it's gone. It's over. You're not going to be Swatty Church Boy or whatever his name was. You're never going to be that person. Damon's in Guildford. Damon, what made you pick up the phone?
I just thought the subject really kind of resonated with me. My mum would definitely consider us working class, and she's pretty proud of that. And I kind of wanted to. I was very fortunate because I went to college just at the time and university when grants were still a thing. Yes. So like 96, 98. But just rewinding quickly back to secondary school, the big difference was, my mum wasn't super smart. She didn't have a great education behind her. But what she did was just support me to find something I loved. Because if you can find something you love, you're going to, never work a day in your life and all that jazz. That's exactly kind of what happened. But
how come? Were your parents together?
No,
just your mum. It was just your mum, because my mum. And I know this isn't your intention, but I'm on tight ropes. There'll be lots of mums and lots of parents who I know you're not judging them. I just want to clarify that no one is saying, there'll be lots of mums who didn't manage, who tried their hardest, but didn't manage to do what your mum managed to do with you. So I know that's not what you're suggesting, but I just want to be clear.
And that's absolutely what I'm suggesting. Yeah. And I was just fortunate that it was just, she had an attitude of just, she just supported me. And what that did was, and I'm not saying other parents don't, like you said, but it kind of broke down that barrier. What it did was it broke down that barrier between them, the teachers and authority and police and stuff, and us. And she made me see people as they're just doing their jobs and stuff. And so I don't know whether I should say this, but I'm going to say it. Like, if I didn't want to go to school, we would work that out together for bullying or for other reasons. Like a teenager, you're like, I don't want to go to school today. So instead of hiding that from my mum, I'd tell her, and she'd be like, okay, we work together on this. Yeah. But going on in terms of like social mobility and things, if I didn't have that grant, I think it was like 96, 98, college into university, that grant and that low student loan, low fees, I would never have been able to go to college. And I've
been a bit remiss. I am. You've reminded me, because, of course, the conversation about why children from poorer backgrounds are becoming less and less represented at universities has almost certainly got a financial context to it as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I remember, it was brilliant. Like, I went and found the course that I needed to do. And then the means tested, single parent. They said, here's your fees and here's your living grant. I mean, I still had a job. I had a job on a Wednesday, Friday, and a Saturday, so I didn't go out drinking all the time throughout university. Sure. That was my cunning plan. And that was. I just wanted to count myself super lucky and fortunate. And those grants, I think, made such a huge difference. And it's something that we're really missing nowadays.
What did you find that you love, if you don't mind me asking? What was the passion you discovered?
I'm an animator.
Oh, gosh. Well, you wouldn't discover that at school. I mean, you might discover it, but you can't do a GCSE in it, can you? No, you can do art, I suppose.
Well, careers advice appointment was hilarious, but it was basically architect or cartoonist, I think. But wow. And we're just about to move to the States in a month for the job. I'm just about to take my family over there.
You fantastic, man! That's brilliant. Is your mum still with us?
Yeah, she is.
So how proud? On a scale of 1 to 10, how proud is mum?
She's like a constant 11, I think. And I'm just driving. I've pulled over now. I'm in the services, but I'm just driving down to help her move house.
Good luck. Send her my love. And a big well done. I love stuff like that, because it's about giving children keys to doors that in some cases they didn't know existed. If I learned anything from my dad, who sent me to a school he couldn't really afford to send me to for precisely the same reasons, just to give me keys to doors that he never got through. And the keys are there, and that you're not going to get all the keys, but the only place you're ever going to get keys is at school. And so not to be engaged or enthused by it, or to be persuaded away from it by peer pressure and stuff like that is. And I didn't pick up half the keys I could have picked up. Don't get me wrong. I mean, that is pure privilege. I didn't pick up half of them because I was a silly little sausage who did get distracted by peer pressure and, of course, ended up getting expelled. So don't come to me. I'm not the key master. But the keys I got, they served me well. And what happens in those early days at secondary school, when you just get turned off keys, you get turned against keys, or at least you fail to understand who's got the keys and that they could give them to you. It breaks my heart. Denise is in Leicester. Denise, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
Thank you very much for allowing me to come on. I've just retired after doing 35 years as a secondary English teacher.
Gosh.
And your question, that you've asked is something that I have thought about and considered for the whole of my adult life. I'm not from a middle-class background. I'm a working-class girl, will be and always will be.
Yes.
I was born and brought up in Lee Park, which is one of the most deprived areas in Hampshire, and was during the 60s and 70s when I grew up. And I was the only person in my family still to this day that's gone on to take A-levels and have a university education. However, the difference between boys and girls has been a stick that English teachers, secondary English teachers, have been beaten with for the last quarter of a century. And when we started considering it back in when the national curriculum came out in 1992, 1993, there was no race involved in it at all.
No.
All boys were underachieving. And since that time, English teachers across the country have done everything we can to the curriculum, which is set by the government, to make everything boy-centric. So,
oh, really?
That's right. So examinations are better for boys. So we limit the amount of coursework that is done. Whole texts are good for girls. So we go to teaching extracts instead of whole novels and whole text. Deconstructing texts and grammar is good for boys and not so good for girls. So English teachers, I promise you, for the last quarter of a century, have done everything we can to narrow that gap. And every time we have performance management, which of course our salaries are now based on our results, every year the same target is set. How are you going to narrow, Denise, the gap between boys and girls? Now, if we're doing everything we possibly can, there's got to be some aspects which are outside of school. Now, one of the things that I obviously believe in is the importance of reading. And research has shown that children that can read at 4 years old are the successful people.
It's true. It's baked in. I think that's another headline today, actually, about these advantages are there from. And there's no. I mean, I think it's fair to say that there's no material reason why children from poorer backgrounds shouldn't be reading. It's going to be environmental. It's not going to be.
Yeah, absolutely, James. Sorry to interrupt you, but I got told when I was trained to be a teacher that I couldn't be successful because I grew up in a household that had no books. We never had any books in our house. But my mum, she signed us up to the local library as soon as we were 4 years old, and she read to us every single night. Now, one of the things I've noticed about working class boys...
We are going to run out of time,
matter
just so you know.
Yes. Yeah, I was just going to say, is that they don't tend to see their fathers reading. And when they come into prepubescent and they're looking around for gender roles, if they see their mothers reading and their sisters reading, and they tend to be female English teachers reading, but no males around them reading, then they tend to see reading as a feminine activity. And you know that reading opens your mind to independent thought. And also, there's one last thing, working class girls tend to be protected more because they might bring trouble home. That's what my parents said to me, you might bring trouble home.
Right.
But it seems to me a lot of working class parents allow their boys to stay out longer, riding around the streets, etc., etc.
No, that makes sense as well. I mean, that is still a sort of
inside reading.
And the more, well, I suppose video games and things like that somehow would fill a gap too. But the more time you are spending at home, the more likely you are to pick up a book. I think if I had a magic wand, Denise, and I sense you're the same, that would be what I would use it for in the context of this conversation, just to get books under boys' noses at the earliest possible opportunity. And just to go for that baked-in phrase, it's in the Times today, the gap between disadvantaged children and their peers has barely changed in 2 decades, and failure is baked in from an early age. This is pupils eligible for free school meals remaining far less likely to gain good GCSEs. And it's from a proper research point as well. I noticed that the Institute of Economic Affairs is quoted in one newspaper today as having something expert to say about Keir Starmer's energy proposals. I'd urge you to Google that alongside my name to get an indication of how much weight you should place upon their contributions to public discourse. 10:46 is the time. 10:49 is the time. I mean, yesterday's newspaper, white working class boys likely to slip further in race for university. Today's newspaper's failure baked in from early age at school. The second story, more responsible probably, because it looks at the gap between kids on free school meals and everybody else, rather than using it, as the Daily Mail inevitably do, as an invitation to bring racial politics into proceedings. Essentially, and I think this is important, so I'll make the point again. When black kids were at the bottom of the pile, it was all the fault of the parents. And it wasn't just not reading books at home, it was being irresponsible and feckless and absent fathers and all the sort of quasi-racist stereotyping that was very, very popular in right-wing media at the time. And now white kids are at the bottom of the pile. It's all the fault of social engineering and do-gooders and people trying too hard to help black kids. It's funny, isn't it? How dishonest these tropes are, and yet how seductive they can be for certain types of people. 10:50 is the time. Cassius is in Ilford. Cassius, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. We've spoken previously. I'll keep this one brief. I'm black. I'll say that now. So people say, what does he know about this particular issue?
It's a terrible phone line. I don't know if you've got me on speaker or something. If we can try and improve it slightly.
No, I haven't got you on speaker.
Okay, that's better. I don't know what's happening. Anyway, crack on.
Right. I coached until about 4 years ago. I coached a football team in East London.
Yeah.
Very mixed. And you stay with your age group from under 10s right through to under 16s.
Okay, that's a good idea.
My sons played for the team, which is how I ended up getting dragged into it. But the team was very mixed. You had white English, you had black African, black Caribbean, Asian. And as they got to GCSEs, like 14, 15, they're obviously looking at GCSEs, further studies, etc. And on more than one occasion, white parents, mainly the dads, would say, I didn't go to college or university. I went to work at 16, earn money. That's what you need to do.
Mm.
Which threw me because my background, you definitely, it was education. Asian parents, exactly the same. Football they played, as long as you did your studies and you did well in your GCSEs and your A-levels, play football as much as you want, but university, basically.
I suppose there's a difficult psychological thing going on here because the way I was raised was similar to you. I've always, my parents wanted more for me than they had themselves, and they did extremely well, but they wanted even more for my sister and I, and they raised us to believe anything was possible, and knowing our place was anathema to us. But the other side of that coin, psychologically, for the dads that you're describing, is there's an implicit criticism. If you're encouraging their sons to go further, you can see how they might be offended by the implicit suggestion that they've somehow not thrived or not succeeded or not done well.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I used to just ask them, well, you're not going to college or anything?
Yeah.
If he wants to, I suppose, but I went to work. I think it's that background,
If it was good enough for me, there can't be anything wrong with it. I get that. I think we've all got a slightly defensive, that's the word I'm looking for, a slightly defensive nature in some circumstances. Maybe.
Yeah, that's probably, yeah. I think it's background, how you're raised, aspirations. I hate saying that word, it makes it sound like you don't think anyone's ambitious, but your view on life, and as a man in particular, is you go and work and earn a living.
And then depending on what your dad does, the relevance of education to your adult future, because many of us, I grew up wanting to be my dad, most lads grow up wanting to be their dad and to do the same job as their dad, and to be a journalist like my dad was, you'd need to really pay attention at school, even though my dad's dad was a publican and a policeman. So he made much bigger leaps in life than I did. But that idea that if I want to be like my dad, and my dad's job doesn't demand educational attainment or qualification, and he left school at 16, then that's good enough for me because I love my dad and I think he's great. That's what I mean by defensiveness. I'd never thought of it that way around before, but you're dead right. And how sad for the lad as well, just to, have the, like I say, keys. It's all about keys. So there's 100 locked doors over there. How many keys do you want? Well, ideally, I'd like 100, but one is better than none. The keys are there. Well, I never had any keys, so why does my kid need those keys? Well, because there's all those worlds on the other sides of those doors. Thank you, Cassius. Ian's in Chester. Ian, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. First time, so a bit nervous.
Welcome.
So I'm consider myself, I was born in working class. My dad was a coal miner. We lived in a coal-board house, which became a council house, and so on. And, my parents, similar to what everyone said, have always encouraged me to do well and to improve. But as a teacher now, I've been doing it, 22 years now, one of the things I've noticed, and it might seem a bit out there, is there seems to be, we've kind of got a pet theory with my colleagues at work, that pupils who are very much into football, love watching football, every kind of coming out of their ears practically. Yeah. They tend to be the ones who, you say something like, you're talking, you need to move space, whatever. Yeah. They seem to be the ones that question and argue, why have you done that? And it's like, well, I'll ask me at the end, but and they'll ask, why I have to move? Oh boy. And it's because...
I know why it is, but I'm going to let you say it. The penny just dropped for me a bit early then. I've got to stop doing this. Carry on.
Well, basically, they've been watching it since they were knee-high to a grasshopper. And they're their heroes. They're literally their superheroes, and that's what they see as normalised behaviour. Whereas we did notice one thing. Some of the ones who particularly hockey more than rugby, they tended not to argue back. They tended, you'd say something and they just accept it. They might come up at the end and say, which is absolutely fine. But during the lesson, they wouldn't question.
You challenge everything. You challenge everything.
Yeah.
The whistle goes. No, it didn't. I mean, this is, I don't know, you mentioned it's your first time, but I write about something I call footballification in the context of politics. It's not actually this element of it that fascinates me. That's more a sort of blind tribal loyalty to your side, regardless of whether they do good or bad. You're never going to admit objective reality. You're always going to be looking at it through a very distorting lens of loyalty, like a football supporter. But this is a huge part of it as well. I mean, if every male adult you admire, and the more immersed in football you are, the more likely it is that every male adult you admire will be a footballer, the more normal you think it is to challenge everything all the time and to resist and never to just sort of get your head down and get on with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have an added problem because I work in Chester and I'm a Wrexham supporter, so we're literally right next door to one another. You could imagine what it's like.
Of course.
And when I said that, I mean, the first few weeks, the people's, actively, I hate this and hate that. And it's just educating, saying, well, you can dislike us, you can want us to get hammered, but do you really hate haters? I hate Hitler. I don't necessarily hate Wrexham supporters. and they laughed. They were like, actually, yeah, now that you put it that way, I get it. I understand it. So...
Well, I was at Chelsea Spurs on Saturday, so I don't know that I'd have been as successful as you in diffusing some of the tensions. Not least because the two managers, the men that are supposed to be providing the sort of guidance and encouragement that the players lack, were biting chunks out of each other all the way through the game as well. So I think that's fascinating. If I had the time and I had the energy, there's a PhD to be done on whether on boys bringing football behaviour into the classroom, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And, our PE department worked really hard to try and diffuse that and to get them away from it. And it's something they've noticed as well. But yeah, it works.
That's fantastic. Ian, that is a sparkling debut. I look forward to your next call to the programme. Obviously, school holidays and term times permitting. Thank you. I love that. I hate Hitler, but I don't hate Wrexham. 10:57 is the time. Ethan's in Manchester. Ethan, what would you like to say?
Hi, it was just to it's basically just to talk about my sort of educational journey. So I am one of these white working class boys, and I'm actually currently at university. So, like you mentioned earlier, to talk about sort of the high school sort of mentality, it happened outside the classroom. It's like you said, it's not cool to be clever. Sort of, you get this sort of hyper mentality across groups of boys where, you shouldn't really go and read. Let's go out with the lads in quotation marks.
So you do that. You do that quite. It was on Sunday, not Saturday. The Chelsea game. My bad. Thank you, Dom. So you do that quietly, do you? So you'd read. You wouldn't. You'd hang out with the lads, as it were, but you wouldn't. Yeah, you wouldn't read a book on the train there with them. Right.
I am essentially a copy paste of it. I mean, when I was in high school, I only got C's at GCSE and then went on to college and managed to get 3 A stars. So. Okay. It happens in high school, and the problem that I think exists is that a lot of the time, like was mentioned earlier, you get these people who get to sort of their GCSE year and they don't want to continue with education, whether that's because the media have said, oh, teachers are bad, you don't need to listen to them, go off, or whether it's because, like you said, they're looking up to parents. I mean, I did a research project at Warwick University that was paid for on educational divides, and we found that parental influence is more important than school funding, the type of school you attend, everything like that. It comes down to your parental perspective on education. And like a caller mentioned earlier, if you've got a father that's going, well, I didn't go to college and I didn't go to university and I still got this, then obviously if the parents are the biggest contributor, then they're going to follow that perspective.
What happened then at 16? What happened when you didn't get sparkling GCSE results? And obviously you had the same parents for when you did your GCSEs as you did for when you did your A-levels. So what happened there? Because you went off to sixth form college, did you, rather than staying in the sixth form at your secondary school?
Yeah, I went off to sixth form college,
you knew about the doors, if you see what I mean. Where did you find the keys?
Yeah, so essentially, I think it was one key got turned. A door opened, I got to sixth form, and I realised that all of these other doors could be opened. You just had to put the effort in. Right. And this sort of maturity, I mean, boys tend to be quite immature, even at sort of 15, 16, but when you get to sixth form, I do think something sort of clicks sometimes.
Well, also the fact that they've gone, if you've gone to the trouble of finding a sixth form college that does courses and A-levels that you like, then you're almost self-editing, aren't you? You're almost editing out the lads who are likely to be distracting you or dragging you down a bit.
Yeah, Yeah, I do think that's where sort of that group effect comes in, because everyone's dragging each other down. But it's when you get to the sixth form, no one really cares for that, I'd say, anymore. Everyone just kind of wants to do their own thing. And I'd say that's the problem, is that a lot of young working class boys aren't going to sixth form. And sometimes by the time they are, it's too late.
Yeah.
But and then also,
go on.
I did do a access program with the University of Manchester, which is where you get a guaranteed offer, you get lower entry requirements, and one of those things to get on the program was to be working class.
And that is the other side of the coin, which we touch on just as the conversation closes, because, of course, the same newspapers that are very tapping the side of their nose and going, white working class boys are doing worse than everyone else, will be the same newspapers that get their knickers in a twist when middle class privately social engineering to keep privately educated children out of universities. Funny that, isn't it? It's almost like they're massive bloody hypocrites. 5 minutes after 11 is the time, and economy hour. Talk about matters fiscal, matters economical. Is that the right word? Sounds like a Gilbert and Sullivan play. Lyric, doesn't it? The matters economical. I am obviously very worried about what is likely to happen to you or people that you know and people that you love, as the reality of the economic situation begins to bite ever further, most obviously with energy prices. But to add to the country's woes, the drought is going to push food prices up even more. So, 11.6% at the moment, costing shoppers more than £550 a year. It's the boss of Iceland. These are the numbers that I'm using. Has stressed that the impact of inflation on groceries was going to go on for quite some time yet. Kantar, the sort of market research agency, has put price inflation at 11.6% over the past 4 weeks compared to a year ago. And that's the highest since you have to go back to a Labour government to compare that back to 2008. It's the highest since 2008. That's when it began. So it's the highest that it has ever been, and it's ugly. And the energy bill is only going to be part of it. You've also got the news that pay has fallen further behind the rising cost of living, according to the latest official data. Average wages have gone up by 4.7% between April and June. Inflation is going nearly twice as quickly. So if you combine the Kantar price inflation research and this Office for National Statistics wage analysis, you're looking at average wages going up by 4.7%, while grocery prices are going up by 11.6%. You do not need to be Rachel Riley to see the problem there, do you? And that is just one element of it. That's independent of energy. 60 million quid's worth of food rotting in fields at the moment because we haven't got the staff to pick them. Now, why might that be? Did anybody ever warn about the possibility of food rotting in fields if we took a political decision 6 years ago that people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, Boris Johnson, Nadine Dorries, Nigel Farage encouraged you to take? Anyone remember that? Anyone? Beulah? Yeah. Millions and millions of pounds worth of food rotting in fields. And obviously, there's a lot going on, but it's not pretty, is it? So the other element today, I'm going to try and knit two stories together because I'm conscious of the dangers of serving up and indeed consuming for myself an unleavened diet of grim economic tidings. So I'm going to try and knit two stories together, the first of which involves businesses, and simply, I think Eddie looked at this yesterday. We're all looking at stuff like this at the moment, aren't we? And it simply looks at that energy bill and the relationship it has with the future of your business. So the Times reports today that many businesses are facing potential closure as a consequence of energy bill prices going up by so much. And what I want to do now with the numbers is tell you, and I know you probably know, tell you what 1,000% means. So if your energy bill is currently £1,000 and it goes up to £2,000, that's a 100% increase. And because most of us only really have a domestic relationship with energy bills, the fact that there's a cap means that it won't go up by any more than that. For commercial energy bills, and I'm pretty sure for public sector buildings as well, there is no cap. Which means that if your bill is currently £1,000, it could go up to £10,000. Or £11,000. It could go up by £1,000. And indeed, we spoke to the owner of a fish and chip shop in Southend on Friday, facing precisely this problem. I'd seen it on Twitter. I'd seen pictures on Twitter of bills and estimates and things that were being sent to, in this case, it was a shop. And I do what I often do when the news is really shocking. I thought, there must be a little bit more to it than that. I thought that must be an outlier. That must be an exception. That must be a case of man bites dog. That can't be happening to every company in the country. That can't be happening to every business premises in the country. And it won't if you're lucky enough to be on a sort of fixed deal. It won't happen immediately if you're lucky enough to be on some sort of fixed deal. But it is going to be happening to an awful lot of people. And the report today showing the number of businesses that are actually fearing closure, fearing extinction, has really focused my mind on this. So I want to knit two stories together. That's one of them. What is the energy bill going to do to your company? The commercial energy bill going to do to your company? And the second one is about childcare, would you believe? Because I want to try and do something for the business side of things and something for the domestic side of things. So on my way to work every morning, I go past the nursery, and I'm always struck by the routine of the parents. I see the same people every day. I'm always struck by the routine of the parents and the necessity of good nursery places for the running of normal life. And I did a double take at this number today. So there's two stories which involve me doing double takes at numbers. There you go. That's why I'm doing them together. That's what they've got in common. I'm doing a double take at the possible 1,000% increase in your energy bill. So if that's you, if that's your business, or obviously, 800%, to just talk the rest of us through what it means. 0345 6060 973. Just this very simple question of what's going to happen to your business when the bill goes off like a rocket, because we've talked a lot about what's going to happen at home. We've talked about food, about warm banks, and about heating versus eating costs. What's going to happen on a commercial level? Because that affects everybody as well. That affects prices for customers. It affects wages for employees. It affects taxes. It affects everything. I'm pretty sure it also applies to schools. So if you're a head teacher and you know about this, do the head teachers pay the electricity bills at school? I honestly don't know. I know nothing about that world. But the blow up in energy bills, one texter tells me, is also going to hit schools, and we're not getting any extra money for this. I'd like to get that firsthand. Listen, I hate this topic because you know what I'm saying, and the reason why I sound a little bit blustery is I'm saying, do you think your business is going to go bust as a consequence of energy bill increases? 0345 6060 973. I've got to do it. We've got to have this conversation because the bloody government isn't. So somebody has to. There's Boris Johnson swanning off on holiday, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss arguing about marbles or whatever it is they're arguing about today. I don't know. But this is absolutely huge, and they are doing nothing. Oh, well, I don't think Keir Starmer's proposals are very... Oh, crikey. How bad is it? Looking down the line, looking down the road. Energy bill hits you, what happens to your business? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. All right? So the other number that staggered me in the news today is this. The number of nurseries in England fell by around 4,000 between March 2021 and March 2022. 4,000 nurseries have closed. Now, at its simplest, that, to me, suggests that you might actually now not have a nursery place for your child. And I want to know what that means. So there's two ways into this second element of this hour's conversation. Why are so many nurseries closing? Is it, as we discovered with hospitality yesterday, largely because of staffing issues? 0345 6060 973. Why are so many nurseries closing? And what's it like when your child's nursery closes? It's such a weird thing, isn't it, nursery care? You kind of, before you become a parent, I've got this theory that one of my favourite phrases for this programme, one of the most important services we can provide, is somehow trying to diffuse the issues that you know nothing about until you need to know everything. The most obvious example is social care. You know nothing except what you've heard on the radio about social care, about finding a care home for an elderly relative, until you need to know everything. You know, right up until the point where you actually just need to find a place. You don't pay that much attention to the issues and to the story. So you know nothing about it until you need to know everything. Nurseries are a bit like this. You just presume before you become a parent. The system is in place. It's normal now. It's commonplace for both parents to work. Yeah, you'll take a bit of parental leave. Mum might take a bit longer than dad, not always anymore. And then you'll both go back to work long before the child is ready to start primary school. You just presume the system is there. It's a proper shock, isn't it, when you discover, A, the process you have to go through to find a good nursery, and B, how much it blooming costs. It's a proper shock, and you can't go back to work without it. So the idea of 4,000 closing, the idea of your child's nursery just shutting up shop, I don't want to sound mawkish, but it fascinates me. I mean, what happens? There must be people listening to this now who have had to give up work because they can't find a nursery place for their child. So I want to talk about that, but I also want to talk about why they're closing, because the energy bills aren't going to help. 034, blimey, they actually sit alongside each other, these stories, don't they, as well? Because if you run a nursery, your energy bill could be the straw that breaks the camel's back. 0345 606 0973. Right. Has anyone understood exactly what it is we're doing this hour? Keith? Beulah? Anyone? It's pretty straightforward. I want to hear from you if you're very, very concerned about what the increase in uncapped commercial energy bills is going to do to your commercial enterprise. 0345 606 0973. And I also want to know about what happens when you can't find a nursery place for your child in this current environment, and why so many nurseries are closing. All right? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. I think that's a pretty good way of addressing some of the economic issues that the country is facing from a variety of perspectives that should leave precisely nobody feeling left out. And of course, if you still think this doesn't apply to you, what do you think happens to the price of your fish and chips if the fellow who owns the shop is seeing his energy bill go up by 1,000%? It's 11:15. 17 minutes after 11. You've got no excuse because you are on holiday at the moment, head teachers. Here it is. Here's the fear. In answer to your question just now, writes Kenny, a former secondary head teacher, education consultant, Dr. Kenny Frederick. In answer to your question just now, head teachers do have to pay energy costs from their budget. Furthermore, they are expected to cover the cost of teachers' pay rises. No extra money has been allocated for either. School budgets are in severe trouble and the government is not interested. It's no consolation, Kenny, of course, but the government is not interested in anything. And in Boris Johnson's time, the government hasn't been interested in anything except either getting him out of trouble or providing him with some inflated nonsense to boast about. Whether things are likely to change, whoever wins the current leadership election, I don't know. But the schools reopen in September. A new Prime Minister will be in place. And if this is correct, they're going to be facing energy bills that have gone through the roof with no actual increase in their budget. I need to speak to a head teacher. 0345 606 0973. Someone's telling me that they're already reading in the media about 3-day weeks in schools. I haven't seen that. I sometimes add at this point, and I do this for a living, but I don't, pore forensically over every page of every organ, but I do find the idea plausible now if the numbers are even close to correct. So we'll add schools to the list. Businesses, nurseries, schools. Wow. Mike's in Wantage. Mike, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Mike.
Yeah, been losing a lot of sleep over this, mate. Yeah, I run a convenience store, typical convenience store you'll find on any high street.
Yes.
With a lot of chillers in there that use a lot of electric.
Of course.
I'm currently on a fixed rate,
Right.
which runs out next February.
Okay.
Which I predict to be probably at the peak of the rates at the time, because in being in the winter as well.
Yes.
At the moment, my store uses approximately £24,000 worth of electric a year.
Right.
And the numbers I'm being given by suppliers at the moment are going to be 4 to 5 times that.
Bang.
So do the maths, we're looking at over £100,000. That will wipe out all my profits.
Yeah.
It put my business in jeopardy. I employ 50 staff, James.
50?
50.
Gosh.
I've got 30 people that work in the shop. It's a big shop.
Yeah, clearly.
And we do newspaper deliveries as well. I've got 20, 30 paper boys.
Right.
All those jobs are potentially in jeopardy, and I have no idea what the figure's going to be.
It's highly unlikely to be lower than anything you're being given, isn't it?
See, they're all asking me to fix now, and they want to fix me in for another 3 years at a rate that's probably 3 times what I'm paying now. And obviously, I'm not keen on doing that because I'm just hoping there's some macroeconomic thing that happens that changes the whole situation. Maybe Ukraine, something sorted out there, and
And I can see, I mean, it's a figure of speech, but you are actually lying awake at night trying to think about this. Because
Every
you don't know
day
what to
I'm
do.
trying to find
it's proper jeopardy, isn't it? Do I buy in now a second worst case scenario? Do I cross my fingers that we're not going to hit worst case scenario?
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
I'm I'm getting quotations for solar paneling on my roof.
Right.
I've got a quote that will save me a quarter of my electric bill.
Yeah.
But the cost to put the solar panels on are £50,000.
Right.
So
it's a one-off cost, and then you save a quarter every year. I know you know this, but these are the problems that business people have to face, and it's why the more you've got in the bank, the better equipped you are to deal with any crises, isn't it? And that's true in every sector and every person. What about? And forgive me, I don't know whether you're aware of I love shops. If I hadn't done this for a living, I'd have been in retail. I don't know if I'd have had the energy to do what you do. I'd more likely have gone into clothing retail. But I noticed bizarrely in one of the Sainsbury's, the little Sainsbury's near me, I think it was a mechanical error. I'm sure it was, but one of the fridges wasn't working. And my Morrisons, the Morrisons that I go to, they have hardly any beer or wine chilled. The convenience store around the corner has it chilled. So occasionally when I'm deciding what to do, I'll go and pay a little bit more in the convenience store because it's going to already be cold, rather than going to Morrison's and buying it and sticking it in the freezer for half an hour at home. So you could, obviously you're thinking about turning some of the chillers off as well.
Well,
I presume.
We didn't want to. Do you know what? Only just the other day when the temperatures were so hot, our compressors failed.
Yeah.
And our chilled beer and wine, as you described, no longer was chilled. And people didn't want to buy it. So to turn it off is a false economy, but it might be something that I'll have to consider, but I'd hate to have to do that.
Of course. And because it's a convenience store and the chilled nature of the beverage is part of the blooming convenience, isn't it? That's the point.
Absolutely.
Is that, I feel for you, and I would never make light of your situations, but equally, I have to try and look for positives. Is there any, you talk about macroeconomic shifts and the end of war in Ukraine.
That's what I'm praying for.
What about British politicians? Is there anything that you just would like to see a cap brought in? Do you understand why they can't put a cap on commercial energy in the same way that they have on domestic energy?
I wish I could.
Yeah, so we'll ask that.
I don't understand why they can't.
No, I don't either. But that's, it's not our field, is it? Well, it arguably might be mine, but it's not yours. So that's a question we can ask and see, either Sunak or Truss or Starmer may, if Starmer hasn't already, may have something to say. But I feel for you. I really, really do. And that is just terrifying. You got one of your major outgoings quadruples overnight in February. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Mike, take care. Do you want to give the shop a shout? You don't have to. It's entirely up to you.
Yeah, it's a cost cutter, Rose News Market in Wantage.
There we go. Okay, yourself down there. Where the beer is chilled and the staff are lovely. 24 minutes after 11 is the time. Here is the tale from the Independent newspaper yesterday. I apologise for missing it. Schools are reportedly considering 3 or 4 day weeks to manage soaring energy bills and teacher pay rises. So budgets are coming under increased pressure. You've got rocketing inflation, budget increases failing to keep up with soaring rates, which could go past 15% next year. And they have to foot the bill for energy bills as well. So recent pay increase for teachers. Listen, I know there's a desperate attempt to pretend that Boris Johnson being unfit for office is somehow the fault of people who've been telling you for years that Boris Johnson is unfit for office. And I'd remind you of this very briefly. What if a foreign country invaded? All the people saying, "Oh, you can't blame Boris. It's your fault. He's not." What if Germany invaded tonight? What would happen then? Do you think he'd come back from holiday? Do you think that he would actually be in charge? Do you think he would actually be capable of taking some decisions? Yeah, exactly. So don't let them lie to you again. The man is electing to he's electing to engage in dereliction of duty. He's sulking. He's sitting in Greece sulking. And the worse the news gets in this country, the more he will enjoy it. The more he will sit there in his smug, narcissistic way thinking, well, that'll teach you to throw me. Not that he'd have done anything had he still been in power, but he's so twisted psychologically, he'll be deriving enormous pleasure from every nail in the coffin of the British economy because it'll allow him to smugly think that things A could have been different if he'd been in charge, and B, it's somehow poetic or natural justice for the people that slung him out, overlooking for the moment, of course, the obvious fact that the people who slung him out were actually the people who are going to be forming the next government. Unbelievable. I tell you what, the point that I nearly lost it last week was when someone started shouting the media. at one of the hustings and talking about why Boris Johnson has gone. Liz Truss, and then she apologised, didn't she, afterwards to the journalist who'd done the interview. The media. Absolutely incredible. I've never seen a more supine or sycophantic media outside North Korea than we've got in this country at the moment. And somehow it's their fault that Boris Johnson had to walk the plank after lying and diddling and partying and all the rest of it like it was going out of fashion. 26 minutes after 11 is the time. So that's why I wondered whether there's anything politicians can do to help. Shivam is in Barnet. Shivam, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I'm a nursery owner for a couple of nurseries actually in Barnet, and just thought I'd call up because, like I think the two stories that you've got go hand in hand together,
they do,
along with plenty of others that you've been going on about for the last 8 years.
Yes.
So we've got Brexit, we've got coronavirus, we've got an inadequate government. I was fairly calm until I just heard you then, and now I'm really riled up and feel the same.
Sorry, I don't want to
do.
rile anyone. I mean, it hits me, so it takes me by surprise sometimes. It takes me by surprise sometimes. You just speak. I tell you what it is. It was Mike. It was Mike. I'm thinking of Mike, and I don't know if he'll thank me for this. Just the mental image of him lying in bed at night, and he can't sleep, and he's a businessman, he's an employer, he's played by the rules, he's done what's right, he pays his taxes, and no one's there. The safety net we all expect to exist, we've entrusted it to Boris bloody Johnson. And it's not there. There's nothing there, and no one cares. It's incredible. So that's why I got a little bit overexcited.
I know, and I agree with you. And from a childcare perspective, we've just been lost for the last years, and early years specifically, we've just always been forgotten. I mean, even through the coronavirus kind of pandemic, and when all the measures came out to support them, we were always kind of an afterthought. We were never mentioned in any speeches. The schooling and education system is talked about, but early years is actually a slightly different sector, a slightly different part. So we're not quite treated as education sector. We're not quite treated as a business. We're just kind of lost in the middle of it all, really.
Why are so many nurseries closing?
Oh, well, you could throw anything in the mix and it's affecting us effectively. So
yes.
Brexit definitely had an impact. We had a lot of fantastic practitioners which obviously left and went back to their home countries.
Well, you don't gloss over that, because there's still people out there who don't believe that it's true. You know, the same with hospitality.
Absolutely.
Yesterday,
with two members of staff.
Yeah. So Hugh in Pamplona, every blooming restaurant he walked into, he was bumping into people that used to work in Bristol or used to work in London, and they have gone. They said, go back where you came from, and they flipping well did. So you've lost staff.
And they were skilled.
Yes.
They were skilled and qualified, experienced people, and you can't just replace them with someone who's not skilled. It's childcare. We have specific ratios we need to meet, so we need to have skilled and qualified people. You want them to have some experience and compassion, emotion, and all these sorts of things build up over time. And now if a load of them just go, where do you replace them from?
So do you think that would be the main reason then for closures?
That's one. Number one is that. Number two is obviously the pandemic. Whilst we had some protective measures, a lot of nurseries will have gone into some serious arrears in that period and just tried to fly through it. And now they're at a point where the cost of living or the cost crisis is kind of impacting them so much. Like they might have their energy bills, food. Food is. You're talking about double in price within this last year. Now, that might sound small, but the impact on that per child is quite big.
Yeah.
Wages has gone up like crazy amounts as well. But every little thing, I mean, the weather right now, I don't have air conditioning in my nursery.
Right.
Now, I had to close the nursery early whilst it was that heat period because it was just too hot in the nursery. So I also lose revenue in that. So now I'm thinking, do I get air conditioning? But then the cost of energy is so expensive. So now you're in a catch-22. Where do you go? I don't have funding for that air conditioning. Or do I just close the nursery in hot periods, which is just going to lose me even more money?
And is a nightmare. I mean, that threatens the business existentially as well, because parents don't want to have their kids in a nursery that's going to be shutting its doors periodically. What happens when the energy bills kick in? What happens when the uncapped energy bills start biting?
I mean, I'm super lucky. I mean, I thought I wasn't lucky, and I thought I signed up just before Ukraine. Energy prices were going up anyway, and I thought I was a little bit taken advantage of, but I signed up to 2 years then. So I have been slightly protected from this period, but I've only got a year left now. So what happens in a year's time? I'm okay. But in Barnet, we're a really good, close community. And we've seen every week to 2 weeks, we're seeing nurseries closed. And one of them last week was directly because they just were not able. It was a times 7 cost for their energy bills. Times 7. and like your last caller just said, we spend around...
And they've gone under.
8,000. And they've gone under. There was just no way they would be able to do that.
So this is helpful for me.
Including wages and everything, yeah.
Yeah. Just so the annual running cost they calculated had gone up by a multiple of 7.
Yeah,
and how much more can you ask parents for? Not 7 times more.
You can't turn around to your parents and say you've got to pay £300 a day. That doesn't work, does it?
Well, you keep your sense of humour, Shivam. I'm very glad to hear that. I mean, you have to,
you've got
right?
to laugh, otherwise you'll cry.
Well, yes, and to combine your situation with Mike's and wonder how many other business people out there are facing identical scenarios. The best case scenario you could be in is that you've got a long period of time left on your fixed rate energy bills. And that's mostly luck. That's why not everybody is reporting 500%, 600%, 700% increases. Scary, right? Thank God this lot are in charge, eh? Because they've done such a bang-up job of everything else. Yeah. Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines. It's 11:34, and I was being a bit daft, wasn't I? Of course you can't ring me and talk to me about what's going on in schools, which is why this school business manager in a London school begins their contribution by saying, I'd like to remain anonymous. I forget that sometimes. It's because I overshare. I'm like my mum. I put it all out there. I always think everyone else is the same, but you've got to be careful, haven't you? I'm possibly a little unfair with that lady yesterday who didn't want to use her real name when she was talking about how more Muslims should apologise for the actions of terrorists. Possibly not. But here is someone who I will extend the arm of anonymity to, because it's, injurious, professionally injurious. We have worked diligently to keep our balance sheet in the black. We've had up to 34% free school meal pupils intake. This year we were told to budget an extra 200% for gas and 150% for electricity. With these costs and staff salaries, we're forecasting a deficit for the next 3 years. Schools are not a part of the conversation about the 3-day school week, and we would not support this. This government is failing schools, failing school staff, and failing families. And on a completely different tip, hi James, I'm a sales rep, and small corner shops are taking out their chillers and freezers as they can't afford the electric to run them. I've not got it, like the nutcracker, to crack this nut open. The way that this conversation just needs a little bit of ignition, that idea of why aren't we angrier? I hate those topics. They don't work on the radio. Why don't we care more? Why aren't we angrier? I think it's because we are quietly and personally addressing these issues. Mike's phrase is the one that's going to stay with us today, isn't it? It's just keeping me awake at night. Quadrupling of his energy bills, and it's not kicking in until February. For some people, it'll be kicking in next week. Our friend in Southend on Friday, fish and chip shop, is going to have to shut on certain days, possibly. Because even I understand this. It's cost-benefit ratio. It costs a lot to open. So you've got to sell a lot of fish and chips. And the more it costs to open, the more fish and chips you've got to sell to make a profit. Ergo, there'll be some days where you're not going to sell enough fish and chips to make a profit, so you won't bother opening. You would have opened when your costs were lower because you would have made a profit. But the higher your costs get, the busier you have to be, which means you're only going to open at busier times. Remember I said to the restaurateur yesterday, get yourself down to that restaurant in Streatham Hill. And he said, oh, no, not today or tomorrow, James. We're shut on Mondays and Tuesdays now. Partly because of staffing, partly because of that relationship between costs and profit. And I don't know what we're doing. I honestly, this interminable. It's like an episode of Doctor Who where the leadership election never ends. Never ends. It's going on forever. And what is your choice? Tweedledum and Tweedledummer. Well, Boris Johnson is on holiday again. It's just incredible. And I don't remember the country being in a hole quite like this. How does it compare to 2008? To the financial crisis? I was on air then, but I was young and naive. I don't get it. So schools, nurseries, businesses, energy bills, take your pick. 0345 6060 973. French people, Julie says, would take to the streets much more readily than us. The government is limiting fuel rises. Is that a total coincidence? That's the government in France. Well, it's partly, as you will know, Julie, because they own a lot of EDF. We've been boiled like a frog and haven't yet noticed. This is what worries me. This text here. Some of us are closer to the flames and are feeling it now, but not everyone. Plus, we can't quite believe how incompetent and negligent this government is. I think that's a problem because the next government, the next Prime Minister, is currently being elected by people who think that the last one was good. Could you imagine what's happened to our country? Look at this. Look at it. Inflation's going up more than wages are, which means wages in real terms are coming down. The vacancies in the job market are at record levels, which means that businesses simply can't fill vacancies, which means they're going to stop looking soon because there's nothing politically on the horizon that's going to fill these gaps. Energy bills are about to go nuclear. I use that as a figure of speech, unfortunately, not as an actual mode of energy supply. All of this is happening on our watch. A lot of it is self-inflicted, not all of it, but a lot of it is self-inflicted. Which politician embodies Brexit? Boris Johnson. Who's electing the new Prime Minister now that Boris Johnson has finally been held to account for his own actions and depravities? Probably Liz Truss. What's her campaign ticket? Good old Boris. It's the media that got rid of him. And who's the electorate? The only selection of the population that actually thinks Boris Johnson did a good job. It's incredible. And you wonder why I go on about client journalism. Natalie's in Lewisham. Natalie, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello. I was just saying, my feedback from the nurseries, I actually contacted 42 nurseries to try and get my children
42? What sort of a lazy bones lightweight are you? 42? That's nothing. You've barely touched the... 42?
It was ridiculous because the feedback I got was I get... my daughter turned 3, so I got the 30-hour free childcare, and I thought, brilliant.
Yes.
Finally, I can go to work. So I was teaching before, but had 2 under 2. My nursery bill was going to be over $2,000 a month. Yep. There was no point in me going back to work. So got into the tutoring, need childcare from 3 o'clock till 6 o'clock, 3 days a week. Thought, brilliant, got 30 hours. Contact the nurseries. The government don't give enough for those funded hours. So they try to almost make you not be able to use them.
Discourage you.
Yes, that's right. So I'm saying, well, I just need, actually just need 10 hours a week. Can I just have them in, the afternoon session?
Yeah.
No. You have to use them only on a Monday, Tuesday.
Right.
No, you can only use them in the mornings. No, you have to use them only term time. They make it so difficult to use those hours, which I understand because...
Well, we're back to the fish and chips again, aren't we? They're not going to turn a profit on what the government is paying for those vouchers, so they would rather get someone else through the door who's going to pay more.
Yeah, so they said, we're not having you. We only do full-time. Yeah, but we only do full-time places. So, no, your daughter has to do a full day for a funded... Well, I like having my daughter at home. I don't work until 3 o'clock.
I quite like my daughter.
I quite like her. I don't mind her too much.
Yes.
And so then, to be fair, I also had my son as well, that is a year younger. So I said, well, they needed to find a nursery that could accommodate him. Again, they don't want to do half days. They don't want to just do 2 days because they're not going to make enough. They need the parents doing the 5-day weeks. And all of the feedback from all of these nurseries was, no, we can't use the funded sessions then. We don't make enough on them. You can use them up to 4 o'clock. Then you need to pay from 4 till 6. Well,
okay.
And I can see it from their point of view. So I did find an amazing nursery who just love children, but they're not making any profit. And then you feel guilty. So I was paying ad hoc for my 2 children. I was paying £7 an hour. Yeah, fantastic nursery, ad hoc. Pick and choose my hours, which is just what parents need.
True.
But they couldn't make a profit. So they've gone from £7 an hour to £12 an hour in the last year to try and...
And that's before the energy bills kick in.
Yeah, so then I can't work. I've got to... there's no point in me going to work if I can't make money and just paying out in childcare. So that's my feedback. But yeah, there was nobody could... Those 3 hours from the government loves to promote it, that they're doing all of this, but in hindsight, they make it so difficult for those nurseries to really use those hours. And they just, they wouldn't accommodate them anywhere when I needed them.
Well, I mean, thank you. I mean, this is... It's grim, isn't it? But you're going to have your experience will be commonplace. And of course, fair play to you for chasing down 42 nurseries in pursuit of one that finally met your needs. But you're right to have sympathy for them as well, because they're going to close. They can't run a business off the back of clients like you. I know you understand this. They need to have as many people in as possible. Closing because they haven't got the staff, closing because the overheads are getting so high, and not able to stay open unless they've got clientele that are signing up for 5 days a week. And now I haven't got my head fully around the voucher issue, but the money that's provided by the government, not enough. Of course, it won't be going up. It won't be index linked or energy bill linked. So it will actually be in real terms, just like wages are. It will be less money today than it was when it was actually announced or awarded. This is, again, it's my job to communicate the sense of urgency and emergency here. And I just wonder how successfully it is being done. Jonathan is in Golders Green. Jonathan, what would you like to say?
Well, I'm not as unlucky as the other callers you have. My electricity bill went from 14p last year to 65p next month.
Okay, so that's quadrupled, really, hasn't it?
Yeah, a little bit more than that.
More than that's nearly 5 times as much.
A little bit more than that. And
what's that in totals? What's that in totals, if you don't mind me asking?
So I'm going to pay just over 100 grand next year.
From about 20?
Like basis. Gosh. Yeah, but what really I can't get my head around is that my supplier continuously tells me that all my energy comes from renewable sources. And the wind and solar power didn't get more expensive.
No, but your supplier's going to charge you whatever they can get away with, aren't they?
Yeah, so
remember, we need less regulation of these companies, not more.
It's doubling every few months, and then you have bosses who say that they print money.
What does the future? I mean, are you going to be all right? Can you absorb these sort of costs? Is it a very profitable business?
It's a profitable business, but it's going to consume more than half of my profits.
Right.
My annual profits, and I had also. I'm in the leisure industry, hospitality.
Okay.
And I had a lot of benefits from the government that were really
during lockdown, the furlough and stuff.
No, after that even.
Oh, and business rate tax relief and stuff like that. Yes.
Now business rate is going to double as well. That's not been helpful.
No, that's true.
And VAT went out again. So, and I can't push it out to my clients. I'm thinking maybe I can charge them electricity levy. Elementary.
It's quite fun. I mean, you're half joking, I think, aren't you?
I'm half joking, but I don't know what
because everyone's going to know. So just going to say, you want to come and use my facilities, you're going to have to pay a little bit more until the energy bills come back down again.
Yes, but everyone is aware of that.
I know they are. That's why I thought you might get away with it, because people they won't feel that you're scalping them. They'll just think, well, if we want it to stay open, particularly if it's the kind of service that people value having in their neighbourhood, they'll think, but of course they've got less money to spend as well, and on the other hand, the kind of thing you do might be the first thing that people look at when they're tightening their belt a bit. They're looking at luxuries that they're going to have to go without.
Yes.
Dear, oh dear. Jonathan, stay safe. I mean, again, as part of the reason I find these conversations quite frustrating is that it is just a list of issues with no real meaningful offer of solution, unlike the first hour where you can talk. Someone's listening to that with a boy who's about to start secondary school. What can you do to make sure he isn't one of the ones that sort of drops off the educational merry-go-round? Books, reading, do this, inspiration, aspiration, do this, do that. There's stuff. What on this? I don't know. Turn your chiller cabinets off, I said to Mike, which, as if it hasn't occurred to him already, but then he'll sell less. So it becomes a sort of pincer movement, doesn't it? It becomes self-defeating. It's 11:46. 11:50 is the time. Jonathan, if you're still listening, the CEO of Octopus Energy, who generally seems to be quite a good egg, has actually put out a video explaining exactly why costs increase, even for companies pushing exclusively renewable energy. I don't know if that's the company you're dealing with, but the boss over there has indeed put out an explanation of exactly why that apparently anomalous situation has come out. And in the interim, it was one of my New Year's resolutions, wasn't it, to address areas of the kingdom, of the United Kingdom, that perhaps we've been a bit remiss in addressing more. So I'm happy to shout out for all the children in Scotland who've started back at school today. Funnily enough, the story about schools and energy bills and things like that seems to be confined to England for reasons that I should probably know but currently don't. Mark's in Hackney. Mark, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, James, I'm calling because we represent just over 900 live music venues in the UK. Cool. And currently, anybody who's having their energy bill, if they haven't got it locked in, we're looking at average price increases in excess of 300%. I have one venue this morning has received a quote from EDF,
Go on.
Which is for a 643% increase. They have no other company that is even in the market to supply them. And I think actually what we really need to start talking about is for small and medium enterprises, this is what market failure looks like.
Market failure, that's the phrase.
This is a monopoly.
Yeah.
It's a monopoly by any other name, and it's just something's got to be done. We need a price cap for small and medium enterprises or they're going to close.
There's not a third option, is there, on those sort of numbers? 643% increase. I presume that the people that run that venue can't stay afloat in that.
Well, in our particular sector, where the profit margins are tiny, I mean, most of these venues
are they tiny? I didn't know that. Right. Yeah. Well, otherwise they wouldn't be shutting at a rate of knots, would they, if you were making money hand over fist? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of them are just kind of community groups. 25% of our sector is actually not for profit.